Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning here. I'm Chad Hyatt. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Aldridge, and with me today is Seth Purcell, our Senior Cybersecurity Engineer. And today, as you might have guessed from the title, we're going to be talking about some horror stories. And really, as we talk about horror stories and going through cybersecurity, we're going to use a couple of analogies here because really from a cybersecurity perspective, and we'll have a little fun with this. Thinking about it from a horror movie standpoint, if you're the audience and you're watching the horror movie, you're screaming, "Don't open that door, the bad guy's already in the house," or "I can't believe you left that unlocked," or "Why did you do that? Why are you guys splitting up? Why aren't you all working together as a team and taking control of the situation?" And there's some interesting analogies to what we're seeing with organizations from a cybersecurity perspective on that. We've helped a lot of different organizations navigate some very difficult situations and some very challenging moments. I mean, maybe the bad guy's trying to get in, or maybe they're already inside the house, or maybe we're trying to help coordinate that response to respond to the bad guy. And by walking through several cases that we've seen, today we're going to highlight what these organizations and others have improved to protect themselves. So when we're talking about what the current state of cybersecurity is, what's the landscape doing right now? In general, threat actors used to, and they still do, they use broad attacks to see who bites. And sometimes there are threat actors that go after specific targets, but most of what we see, they're looking for opportunity. They're doing phishing and they're doing social engineering. Both of those are good examples of that. One of the key things that we've seen change this year is how long it takes from that opportunity to say, great, I've got potential credentials, or I'm corresponding with someone inside an environment. They don't realize that I'm the threat actor at this point. Moving from that stage up to exploring your environment. What can they do now that they've got this hook in the environment? And then eventually exploitation. We used to see that take 4 or 8 or 12 or 24 hours or even multiple days between that first bite and the threat actor's first coordinated attempts to do something with it. Now we're seeing it take minutes. And threat actors have been improving their tool sets and use of automation. There's an unfortunate economy about this where threat actors do participate in their own underground economy and they're constantly improving their tool sets. We're also seeing their use of AI to make it faster and more convincing. And there used to be a time when, I'm sure you've all seen phishing emails, where if it's got bad grammar or if it's got bad spelling, okay, clearly that's a phishing email. Now you probably are seeing social engineering attacks that have good grammar, good spelling. They mimic what normal business correspondence looks like. They might even mimic what your service provider's correspondence look like. They're using their tools, they're using the evolving technology to make it easier to try to build trust that they can then exploit. You're going to hear us talk about building layered defenses, how to not just rely on one thing, but rely upon many things working together, because no one thing is going to stop every type of risk or every type of threat out there. When you're thinking about managing risk within your business, you delegate. You have to for your business to be able to operate. And keep in mind that each individual in your organization has their own perspective of what security is and how important it is relative to their role and their experience and their accountability and their authority. Everyone does have a role to play in security. But as leaders, it's important for you to not over-delegate the critical security decisions. You're still in charge of setting your security culture and your security posture and how much risk you want to accept and how much risk you want to control. You don't give everyone in your organization unlimited contract signing authority or unlimited check or disbursement authority. You put controls around those things. You have to think about doing security the same way to say, I'm going to set the high-level directions and policies at the leadership level. We're going to implement controls and management of those things at the management level, and then there's an end-user responsibility to understand the importance of their role in keeping all the other pieces working together. Security has to be important to the ongoing success of both the business and the individual roles, and landing that is a key part of building an effective defense against some of these horror stories. It never hurts to remind ourselves of the 4 things that you can do with risk. This is true of any type of risk. You can accept it, you can control it, you can transfer it, or you can avoid it. And cybersecurity is just risk management. Now, keep in mind, your business already has outside forces acting on it all the time. They might be regulatory, they might be professional, they might be competitive, they might be supply chain, they might be changes in the market. You navigate these risks and you make these choices all the time. What many organizations have been surprised by is how much cyber threats are now affecting every business. The risk is growing. And you can choose to disregard the risk. Disregarding the risk really innately means you're accepting the risk. And if you don't accept it with some controls around it, the risk can really come and bite you, which is what some of these horror stories came from. The threat actors are often opportunists, and they're going to take what they can get. Understanding that the risk is there, the risk of losing the trust of your customers or your vendors, or the financial loss through direct fraud, or losing the ability to conduct business for a day or a week or a month. Understanding that is really the first step to being able to make informed choices about it. So we manage risk by implementing layers of security, and I'll use a castle analogy. And after all, we're talking about horror stories. We'll go a little medieval here, and we'll talk about building castles. Castles have a keep in the middle where you've got your treasury, the important business, important records, things like that. It's not just sitting in an open field on a table that somebody can walk by and do something with. And then around that keep, you've got a gate to the keep, and you've got an inner bailey, and you've got courtyards, and then you have exterior walls, and you've got gates and drawbridges and moats, and maybe a limited approach to it. Those are all tools that contribute to the security of protecting what's important to you. But if you think about it, that's not security, because if the bad guy can pick the lock and walk right in, great. So you supplement that with people, and you've got people that are now manning the gates or watching the traffic and looking for things unusual. You put sentries up on the wall. You're looking to see, is there smoke somewhere? Is a fire breaking out? Is there a fight? Are there invaders on the horizon that are storming the gates? Do you need to start to organize a response? So people are an important part of the security as well. But then when I start talking about organizing a response, they're not just figuring out the plan on the fly, or if they are, they're probably not doing so very effectively. They've thought through, if this happens, then we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this. We know what our tools are. We know what our response capabilities are. We know what our resources are. And we know who the decision makers are. If battle is upon us, or if there's a threat inside the walls, what are we going to do to organize and start dealing with it? And the time to know those things is not at the time that the threat happens. Now, sometimes that is the time that you have to figure those things out because you realize there's gaps in your planning. But overall, it's about putting the tools and the people and the processes together. To land it for cybersecurity, when we talk about layered cybersecurity, the top three layers, the big three layers, are technology, people, and processes. Most of you probably have a lot of the technology pieces in place. Those are tools that you can subscribe to in a lot of cases. Now, granted, those tools will do most of what they need to do out of the box, but the processes and the people then customize that or configure those and align them to what your actual business is looking for and help them work together. If you just get the tools, you're really not getting the protection that the tools are capable of offering because they're not working as part of a unified defense. And as we walk through some of these horror stories, Seth is going to call out there were gaps here, or there were gaps here, and there were gaps here, and we'll try to land that so you can actually be thinking about, do I have this in my organization? It is unfortunately not possible to say we can stop all threats all the time. Threat actors are people. Their tools are evolving too. But by using a layered defense that includes technology, people, and processes, the goal is to be able to detect early enough that we can respond effectively and minimize the risk, minimize harm, and block everything that we can without interfering with what the normal business operations are. And with that, you guys have probably listened to me enough for the first 5 minutes of my horror and castle analogies. So I'm going to turn this over to Seth, and we can start walking through some of the approaches and some of the actual case experiences that we've had with this. Seth, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to start off today with discussing some of the things that Chad had actually already touched on, which is threat trends. We've got shorter dwell time, session replay, and the use of applications to gain and maintain persistence. Now, what shorter dwell time actually means, it means that once the initial action of compromising an account has occurred, how long before the next move has happened? I'm seeing times that are as low as 4 minutes, 5 minutes before the next action occurs. And that usually means that they've already started to try to exfiltrate some kind of data. Then we've got session replays. Now, session replays are only occurring because of what we call session theft. Now, session theft can occur in ways that you probably haven't heard of before, and that would be actually just clicking on a link. It could be as simple as even opening and viewing an email. Now, those are not the most obvious ways that you would think that you'd get compromised, but it is possible. A session replay basically means that once you've clicked on that the threat actor now pretends that he's used with that same data, that same session, and replays it so they can gain access. Well, that takes us to
at
the
risk of
application.
throwing off your stride, I'm going to call out just for the audience, and I recognize we've got both business leaders and technical here in the audience. When we're talking about sessions, we're talking about SaaS tools that you're subscribed to. Some of you probably use Salesforce or other CRM tools. A lot of you use Microsoft 365 for email tools. The authentication process that you prove who you are to that system to then get access to your data, that's all encapsulated in something called a session. You have an active session where you've proven you are who you say you are, and you now have the rights and privileges in that system. And what we're seeing is that threat actors are finding interesting ways to hack into the middle of that process and say, great, you've just proven you are who you say you are to get access to your email. As a threat actor, I'm going to go right in the middle of that. And now I can also prove I'm you to your same system that you wanted to secure. They're inside the walls at that point. And Seth, sorry to interrupt. I'm just not calling that one out.
You're totally fine. So also, a session replay, something that most people may not realize either, is that MFA is not necessary at this point because they're already using a authenticated session. So you putting your MFA prompt in has given them all the access they need. Doesn't need to be another prompt at all. And then let's follow up with the applications to gain/maintain persistence. So this is referring to enterprise applications that exist within your cloud tenants or your SaaS tenants. So what I usually see after the session replay is a new application has been added into the tenant. And then immediately following that, you'll see the same user grants access to that particular application. Now, what this does is it means that that session has given that particular threat actor all of the access they need, and they never have to gain access again. They have built their persistence in the environment based off of that application. So once that's there, they can look for other accounts through graphs. They can look through, excuse me, I'm using technical term here again, but Microsoft Graphs is a way to reach out through the tenant. But anyways, it's just a way for them to maintain access and then exfiltrate and then move on through the environment and do whatever they're looking to do. And with that, I'd like to bring in our first horror story. And that would be a victim of all of the threat trends together at once. Now, this is a nonprofit that had basic controls, most of the basic controls that were provided by us in place. None of the controls that you're going to hear that are labeled as standard. And they believed that they were fairly secure, but they didn't have any kind of controls like a conditional MFA to ensure that if somebody logged in from outside the country that they were protected. We got an alert for this particular threat from a different user. The user reached out to us and said they may have clicked on a bad email and they think that they are currently compromised. Well, we decided to do an investigation, and the investigation turned up that not only that user was compromised, but another user was compromised 4 days earlier, and they had provided the exact access that we just described in the previous slide. They had been compromised by a session replay. That session replay was used to create another application within the environment and build persistence. And then the very same threat actor went right back and was doing it for each account that he could compromise. Now, remediation for that meant that I had to go back quite a ways and actually find out where this started. Where was the first point of entry? We had to pull logging for months and actually dig through the last login times at all point back to that particular application and the IPs that were involved. Eventually, we did get them back on their feet, and they've gone through remediation with a cybersecurity insurer and legal representation. But let's talk about the lessons learned. What was actually missing from this environment that could have helped them get this protected or to avoid this altogether, to mitigate it? Well, we did not have any kind of email internet threat filtering to actually look for any kind of bad email information or bad actors attempting to send these compromised emails. We also did not have SIM or basically the ability to look back at logging from beyond the normal amount of logging. We actually had to dig deep down inside of what we had available inside the tenant, which I think was a month there, and then we had to reach out to the DFIR vendor, or excuse me, the discovery vendor through their cybersecurity insurer to get more information. They also did not have security awareness training available for any of their users, so nobody was being trained to avoid these pitfalls. And that actually links right back over to security-minded culture. The culture was not focused on protecting the environment. Standards and policies are something that we would have provided in order to ensure that the particular setting that allowed this user to accept this application, this enterprise application into the tenant, was not in place. And that's why this occurred. Now, it's important to note that it's not a bad setting. It's just a setting that's there by default.
And I'll call out, I'm going to go back to that horror movie analogy. We're the audience members at this point saying, he's inside the house, don't do that. Keep in mind, every one of these organizations that we're working with, as part of the conversation that we're having, we're always working with these organizations to help them understand risk and to be able to manage these levels of risk. And going back to what I was originally talking about with the idea about the leadership and the management and the end users on it, some organizations do accept higher levels of risk. They'll either accept that risk is probably unlikely and great, we'll go on because the cost or the inconvenience to mitigate it appears to be disproportionate to the risk. We're trying to work with every organization to help them understand what we're actually seeing out there so that we can connect the dots. And at the end of the day, everything that's on these lists, it's a business decision. And we recognize that some of these business decisions do have costs, but what we're seeing overall is that organizations that have actually gone through these types of risk events, the cost of protecting and controlling the risk is substantially less than the cost of incurring the risk should something actually occur. And unfortunately, the chances of those risks happening is increasing with organizations, which is what we're seeing across the landscape.
And with that, I'd like to touch upon threat actors and how they go about choosing what they're going to do within an environment. So what we have here, anybody who actually is familiar with cybersecurity will know what I'm trying to get across here, which is that we have a kill chain. We're going to call it game plan today. And that basically is, what is their plan to start at? What is the plan for a threat actor once they have figured out what they want to do with the target? And that's, they want to get access, they want to get persistence, then they want to exploit that access and persistence to gain any kind of exploitation they can get. And that can be, if you can switch to the next slide.
Sure.
And that would be the exfiltration of data. It could be committing fraud within the environment, getting somebody to change their accounts and transfer money back and forth. It could also be ransomware. Now, I have here or all three. We have actually seen that happen because the idea behind this, the psychology behind the three different choices is, I want to make money the easiest way I can with the shortest amount of time invested in this. Exfiltration is one really easy way to do that because you just find data that looks like it's something you can trade in the dark web and you exfiltrate it. Well, what if what I'm finding is not really worth all that much? What if it's pretty benign data? Well, what is the business that I'm infiltrating? What does it do? Oh, does it work with other people that have a lot bigger bank accounts than them? Okay, let's commit fraud. Well, what if they doesn't have that? What if they don't have any kind of businesses that are going to help me get money, or that I can't exploit them because I don't have email access? Well, that's where we just say ransomware, because ransomware gives me the ability to lock down everything in the environment and then step away. And then that just leave the account number, and if they decide to pay me, they will. And that's exactly why they choose the exploitation path that they have here. They're trying to exfiltrate, they're trying to get fraud, and if they can't do either of those, they're going to ransom the company. Let's talk about the actual costs of those exploitations. So we have a little chart here for you. That's the direct costs and the indirect costs. So once the exploit or the exploitation of the company has occurred, there's going to be downtime, there's going to be recovery costs, there's legal liability if you have any compliance that you have to follow, or regulatory compliance. There's fines for those regulatory compliance. And then we have indirect costs. Well, that's going to be, your loss of business, your reputation damage, the cost of any new tooling. There's even there's going to be the cost of what happens if you lose employees, if you lose your entire business. Some people don't have a lot of they don't understand the full cost of this. The downtime, all of these can mount up to the point where you don't have a business anymore because you're not able to recover from the actual cost of the exploitation. 1 second. So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about how you can mitigate those costs. And that would be cyber insurance. Now, we are not a cyber insurer, and we do not provide any real, I would say we don't provide any kind of insurance help, but we do actually we introduce our clients to partner cybersecurity insurers, and they will help guide you on what is the best coverage for you. We do not usually get in the middle of that, but what we will try to do is provide you the necessary tooling, the necessary policies and standards to ensure that you actually are covered by those insurers. Let's talk about those specific tools. So that would be your multi-factor authentication. That'd be your air-gapped backups, which we actually provide through a great vendor. I love working with them. They've helped us out quite a bit. Managed detection and response. You've got patching and vulnerability, and there's security awareness training. Now, it is important to note that across the board, these are the 5 things that every cybersecurity insurer has always asked for our clients. It's something that they always ask for, but they may ask for more depending on the amount of risk that they're going to entail with your business. And the larger the scale of your business is, the more that you're making in a year is going to change what the requirements are from those cybersecurity insurers. There's tools like, I digress. I'm not going to get into tools that you may not know, but it's going to be the higher the risk, the more tooling, the more controls are necessary to protect you or mitigate your issues.
And I will call out that a lot of people attending probably remember the good old days where 6-7 years ago, your cybersecurity insurance might have just been a rider on your general policy, or if you did have standalone cybersecurity insurance, you might have had to fill out a 1-page questionnaire, or maybe just sent an email to your broker and you're good to go. And then we saw the number of pages start to steadily increase as the number of risks in the environment and the number of successful exploits from threat actors increased through the years. And now we regularly see cybersecurity insurance applications that are 3, 4, 5 pages. I saw one that was 10 pages long. These 5 basic tools, people, processes that they're looking to have in place, this is the you must be this tall to ride type situation. Or a cybersecurity insurer is going to look at you and say you're probably not an acceptable risk. I can't sell you a policy based on what's happening out there. You need to do these things or I can't even insure you. That said, as Seth called out, as your business scales up, as your revenue increases, as your scope increases, there are additional cybersecurity controls that we are already seeing starting to come into the conversations. They just aren't yet hurdles for every small and mid-sized business out there. But the way that we're seeing these trends go overall, we're expecting that more and more of those get integrated into the base requirements because they're effective tools in a layered approach to manage the risk of what these evolving threats look like. With that, I'll let Seth walk through the next threat.
So our next horror story is waking up to total destruction. Well, that sounds really doom and gloom, and it is. It's scary stuff. This particular horror story centers around a manufacturing business who understood a lot of the underpinnings of mature risk management, but they didn't have quite everything in place. So to start off with, they did understand that they had a maximum downtime that they could incur, that they were willing to accept if they went down. Unfortunately, as we'll get into that later on, they went past that by quite a bit because of particular decisions that were made. Basically, we got a down detector from one of our NOC tools that we have here that basically said all of the machines that were in the environment were no longer responding. They were offline. Everything's offline. That's odd. So we move on to validation. We try to figure out what's going on. It's real early in the morning. The customer hasn't even called yet because they don't know anything's offline. Well, we found a VMware host or a virtual machine host that had just one screen on it. And in the center of the screen is a little file, little notepad README that says README. That's all. And inside of it is a ransomware note that says the entire network has been ransomware, it's been encrypted, and you need to reach out to such and such to get it taken care of. I'm going to skip into the remediation. There's a lot more that goes into this, but remediation of this mostly was done because we had an excellent backup system that is immutable and protected and off-site, and we actually were able to bring up all of their business necessary items within about an hour or two, which is great. But we had some other problems with some other key pieces of software that they use that we just could not bring up properly because of what we're going to talk about in our next slide, which is our lessons learned. So as I said, we had everything down in that entire environment. So the first thing that we have to go about doing is, well, one is restore the environment, but two is we have to ensure that the identities, the users, that all of them are no longer compromised. We have to ensure that they are safe, protected, and that there's no other access to them from the outside. So we set about doing that, and then we moved on to the next part, which was ensuring that all of the other machines around that, all of the user machines and servers that we were bringing back up, that that we could trust them, that we had cleared out that environment to make sure that there was no other way that a threat actor could access those. And that meant cutting off network access. That means making sure machines are completely protected, they're clean, they don't have any kind of malware on them. And then we move on to our last piece, which is making sure that the networks that connect to them are safe. And this is where we ran into a problem. We noticed that we couldn't find really any proof of this threat actor being here, except for one small indicator that was not linked to anything else, and that was a outside network connection. And sure enough, that network connection was to another business that worked with them. So they piggybacked across and then took out the business. Now, I'd like to go back to our last slide that we had before this that talked about exploitation. And that is, again, the psychology of this. So we saw in our investigation that the threat actor did, in fact, try to exfiltrate things. But when he did, he noticed that everything he was pulling from the two accounts he had created was not usable. He tried to access the database they use for their ERP software, and it doesn't provide any real value to him at all, whoever this person is. So he moved on to fraud, but of course he couldn't figure out how to access or to any specific clients that they wanted to access or try to extort money from or get them to hand over money. So he moved on to the last step, which was he burned the bridge once he jumped across, and he ransomwared that entire company. Then he went back to the previous company and ransomwared that entire company as well. Now, this is actually a pretty large company, and all of the subsidiaries of it, somehow beyond these two, did not actually get affected, but it has to do with the way the network was configured. And once we figured that out, it took us about 2 weeks and 3 days to actually get them back into their normal state. Unfortunately, that meant that they went 3 days past their maximum tolerable downtime. And that's where we actually move into our next what was missing. Now, they did not have an incident response plan, a business continuity plan, but they did understand maximum tolerable downtime. And that's great. that honestly is part of the business continuity. Biggest problem here is we did not see a cybersecurity insurer or an attorney that was involved within the very beginning of this process. And it was sporadic. It was kind of it didn't follow the traditional way that you should be introducing those into your incident response. And I'd like to bring that up. Let's talk about incident response and what is the proper way to go through incident response.
Yeah. And if I could take point for just a moment, I'm going to tie this back to what I mentioned earlier on. Just like each level in your organization, whether it's a business leader or a manager or an end user has a particular view on security, there are different roles in an incident response. And when we say incident, we're talking about there's an indicator, there's something unusual. The guard has noticed something unusual at the gate or inside the walls or off in the distance. And so the guard raises the alarm and starts spreading the information out. Well, we're in the technical response phase at that point up on top. We've detected something, now we need to validate, is it real? If it moves past the point where we validated, okay, there really is a threat here, this is not benign, there still is a technical response. You still have to rally the guard, you still have to man the gates and all that other fun stuff. But what's important is that you also then need to be thinking about what's your business response and what's your overall incident response for it. And those are very different from the technical response. The guard is going to be happy shutting and locking the gate and standing there saying, great, I've done my job. I have done the technical response. The intruder will not pass my gate. But that doesn't mean that the business, that the overall castle is still in the right state. The bad guy, the horror story nemesis is somewhere inside the house or could be inside the house. The business response is usually led by the business leaders, the business continuity plan. Who's going to be the person that's making the decisions about the communication and the management and the coordination within the overall event? Seth just called out an important part of planning on this, which is incident response. And there are people that are professionals and experienced that have this impartial, not necessarily impartial, but a not emotionally wrapped up in it third-party view that can be invaluable in navigating a very difficult situation. Seth called out that group had over a 2-week downtime. You can imagine how stressful that is on minute 1, hour 1, day 1 of, okay, what do I have to work with? What can I do? And there are professionals that you can subscribe to and work out arrangements. There are even peers like breach coaches. They could just be another business owner that just walks through it with you saying, okay, let's think through what this looks like. They're not in the midst of the problem. They're one step removed and they're a sounding board to help guide through this. And Seth, I probably stole some of your thunder here, but I wanted to make sure to tie this back to that philosophies of security and how that varies by level.
Sure. And actually, I'd like to take 1 second to answer Jeff Rodriguez. You asked, how often should an incident response plan be updated and tested? And I just want to go ahead and address that while we're sitting here looking at it. And that is at least once a year, a test, and you should update it every year as well. You're more than welcome to update it more than that, but at least once a year. Also, I would like to state that notice that we have this chart here showing the different levels and when they're occurring. Once validation occurs, the leadership should be working on their business continuity plan. The breach coach and insurance should be working almost in tandem with technical response to ensure that everything is going to plan. You do not want to bring in the same security team. This is from legal advice that I've received that actually is doing the recovery as your digital forensics team. They are, at least according to legal representatives, I've been told that is not an impartial way to do your incident response plan. But they should be involved in the recovery. They should be involved in containment and eradication. The important part after that, as always, is going to be the after action. And what is it you learned from this particular incident? What did it teach you about your weaknesses in the environment? With that, I think we can actually move along to our next story.
Yeah, let me click here. So I'll present this one. So going back to those three layers and how people think about security based on their levels of exposure and what their job role is. In this particular organization, they actually had a fairly robust IT environment, but there were some choices made because some of the security philosophy was pushed further down in the organization to where the culture and the decisions about security weren't necessarily being made at the end user level, but they also weren't being made at the business leadership level. And as you can imagine, the decisions were weighed differently for risk than I'm sure that a lot of you would weigh the decisions for risk. If you look at it and say, no, it's just an operating thing, it just needs, when we flip the switch, the lights come on, we're secure, that's an entirely different philosophy of what happens if we flip the switch and the lights aren't on. How are we lined up? Or what if somebody's already inside the house or inside the castle? How do we respond to that? And so when you approach it from the lower tier decision making, you start looking at it from their perspective, and they're seeing these costs of, great, it's going to cost me this much to secure this or maintain this team or maintain this cybersecurity insurance or this particular coach. Those relationships all cost money, and if they aren't fully appreciating the risk to the organization, then the organization is probably not as protected as the organization would like to be. And in this particular case, they had made some technical decisions that ultimately permitted the organization to be breached, not because any one of their layers of security had failed, but because they chose to not have certain layers of security, because that choice was not being made at the leadership level, it was being made at the lower tier level. And if my job is to save money, I will save the money that's immediately in front of me, and we're not going to do these things. In this particular case, a user account was compromised, got inside the keep of the castle, bad guys now inside, is able to start working with the information, exfiltrated information, did do the ransomware, went through the playbook that Seth just talked about, and it all happened because there were purposefully, or by choice, not purposefully, that no one intended the environment to be compromised, but there were choices made that permitted the accounts to not be protected on particular computers that then led to a threat actor being able to get a foothold that they were then able to explore the next step and the next step and the next step along the way. The other thing that didn't happen in this particular case is because those decisions were not being made at the business leadership level, when alarms or indicators were starting to be raised early on in the process, they were being raised to people that didn't have a vested interest in the overall health of the organization. They had interest in the operations of the organization. And they would look at the raised points and say, this doesn't impact our operations. I can tell you've already shut down what that indicator was telling us. For that specific indicator, let's move on. We're good. Versus let's look at the broader picture, and when we're asking the question, is this normal? It's being done with an operations mindset versus a business leadership mindset, which as business leaders, you would probably say, is this indicative of something else that's happening under the scenes? Why are we seeing this? So the things that we're missing here, again, these were choices made within the organization as cost-saving measures. Many of the same things that Seth has already called out from a technology and people and processes. There were things in place. It was possible to recover this environment, but it did take time to do it, and it was certainly inconvenience, and it was expensive to do it. There were things that were not in place in the environment, and in general, a lot of these things, in fact, everything that we're seeing on this list, we'd consider that every business today in 2024 going into 2025, these are standards. These are what we're seeing as effective layered protection. I mentioned in this particular case how important it is to have an incident response thought process through this, and that includes both your internal team and your external team. We're not necessarily in your business. We're technically an external incident response team. That internal team, and while we partner with you, a lot of the business decisions have to occur within your team. So it's important that you have people within your organization, maybe that's you directly, that say, in an incident like this, I need to be the person that is directly involved in representing the business's interest. Not every incident may rise to that occasion, but you might set certain thresholds and say this can be dealt with here, this can be dealt with here, or you make the choice along the way. But then you're supported by that external response team. That internal response team is not just you, though. If you think about it, from a leadership to a management to an end user level, your IT team, that's us in a lot of cases, your legal team, your ops team, your HR team, internal communications, it's important to talk through ahead of time and start to establish at least some baseline processes to say, if this happens, we're going to do this, and here's how we're going to manage communication and start carrying things through. Then you've got your external response team, your IT managed services provider, or managed security services provider. You've got your breach coach that Seth called out, the cybersecurity insurance, digital forensics, and incident response. Having all of these pieces in place they're all methods to be able to manage and control that risk, so you can accept as little risk as makes financial and appropriate sense. You can avoid the risks that you don't need to have, and you can control the risks that you can appropriately do so. Let me go through another example here. So this is very similar to one of the cases that Seth called out, where there is a perimeter in this business, and this business's network had layers of security in place. But this business also has contractors or outside people that act as members of the organization. And those contractors were operating on systems that were not within the business's direct control, but they were still given privileges that were equivalent to someone that's inside the business's direct control. So it's thinking about, well, we built a wall on 3 sides of the castle, but maybe not on the 4th side. And what happened in this particular case is the outside group wasn't necessarily as invested in security or in thinking about all the tools and layers that need to be in place. And the account that they were using, which was provided by the organization, was compromised. You could be exposed to the same thing if you think about the vendors and the partners and maybe even the contract employees that you work with. It's very important that we establish small walls of trust around those types of things, so that when they are interacting with the things that are important to you, the damage they can do if someone were to compromise that account is very limited. In this particular case, it was a compromised email account, led to additional information exploitation within that email account, led to some additional unfortunate customer and vendor correspondence that flowed through. But when we traced back, it was determined that the reason that account was compromised is because of what was happening in that outside environment that the business didn't necessarily have direct control of. That led to conversations for the business to put controls in place to say, let's put a bubble or let's put a wall around that, such that we need this to happen to be good business. It makes business sense for this relationship to exist, but we need to configure this relationship and this access in such a way that we can see everything that's happening within it to the same degree that we'd hold ourselves accountable to it. So they had appropriate things inside that main environment, the Managed Detection Response, Security Operations Center, and the Security Information Event Management, and the standards and the policies. And because they had those things inside the main fortress, when this account got compromised, we were able to see very quickly, this is unusual. This is happening in something that is within your security domain, and we were able to step in and stop it. Yes, there were a few messages that went out. There was some correspondence that went out. There was some data that was exposed within the mailbox, but the business didn't experience an overall interruption. And I'll call that a success, because we can't stop every attack. But what we can do is be prepared to detect and respond and recover as quickly as possible, because after all, we are operating in an adverse environment. There are people actively trying to do you and all of us harm, and our job is to detect them as soon as we can and respond to it and recover with a minimum amount of business interruption, and that's how you manage the risk. Seth, back over to you. I'll let you run through this one.
So this is yet another success story, and I really like the title. It says security team with the right tools. That would be me. It was a security team on this particular one as well. The culture is they believed that, well, this particular client is heavily security focused. They want to ensure that both them and the businesses they work with are protected. What's interesting here in this particular indicator that came through was it showed proof that even if we have things like SIM or the right tooling in place, some indicators that should have been caught or should have been seen will not be caught. And in this particular case, we received a forwarding email alert, or a forwarding rule was created for this particular client. And it was for a very important person at the client, which is interesting because we never received any other kind of login information for this. The reason for that was the threat actor had logged in with a VPN that happened to be very close to where that client actually works. So, of course, we didn't see that. Upon investigation, I found several rules that were created within 5 minutes or so that made sure that the person she was speaking to at another business was also was blissfully unaware of any kind of fraud that was occurring between them. It would delete any emails that were sent from that user to her saying that they were compromised and vice versa, which was very interesting. Remediation was obviously the removal of the tools. Again, an investigation about anybody else and that particular person that was affected, and ensuring that compromise of the accounts were taken care of. Let's talk about not lessons learned, but exactly what made this a success. Well, email threat filtering actually sends Defender reports back to me while I'm looking at SIM, and it said specifically that a new forwarding rule had been created for that user. Well, I see those all the time, and I decided to investigate. Interestingly, in this one, it did not give me any detail about what the forwarding rule was, so I actually had to dig deeply with the user themselves. The security incident response team, that's me. SIM is actually the tool that reported all this, or at least ingested the data. And let's take a second to talk about SIM. SIM is security event and information, or security information and event monitoring. And what it does is it collects data from many different sources across your environment. It analyzes them. It uses AI to help basically correlate the data it sees to give indicators of specific behavior that are probably bad. And then it monitors those and then identifies them. So I can actually go and look into them a little bit deeper, because there's no way that I have enough time to look through billions of events in a day. There's no way. So what does this do for us? Well, it's helping us identify things that I couldn't look through on my own with my own time. And I want to go now and talk to you about where I'd like to ask you some questions about where you are right now and where do you want to be. And let's actually step through these. If you've been to my other lunch and learn, you've actually seen me ask these same questions just with less color. And we will do the bare minimum of security so that we don't look completely negligent. I would like to add there that if you believe that you're doing the bare minimum for security, you likely are not doing the bare minimum for security. You're usually doing a little bit less than that, or more than that. And the proof is in the pudding when it comes to assessments that are done on clients, not just our clients, but across the board from CIS or NIST. They say that roughly 5% of all people that actually take an assessment are actually accurate with the amount of information they give when they do a self-assessment. So if you believe that you're doing bare minimum, likely you are not. Let's move on to the next one. We want our security to be aligned with our industry peers. We do not want to fall behind, but we also don't want to be a leader. Now, in my career, I have met very many business leaders and tech leaders who feel this exact way. And it's because bleeding edge technology usually comes with other pain points, other costs, downtimes that are associated with them. And I understand that, but in reality, you don't necessarily want to just be the leader, you want to be a differentiator. So let's talk about this last one. Security is a differentiator for us. Basically, it's helping us win business. We will win businesses and gain the trust of our clients and partners because of our security. And that means that we're using our proactive behavior and security to show the industry that we are going to be a leader, that we want their business and we're willing to protect their data. That's where I believe everybody should align. It's difficult to get there, and you don't need to make a jump from the beginning of bare minimum all the way to security differentiator. The idea is you want to make a defined path of where you want to go, and you want to always improve in security. And with that, let's talk about the tooling. So basic security, we provide these to our clients. Well, except for multi-factor. We provide these to our clients, and we believe this is what basic security should entail whenever you're getting started in security. That would be everything that you see here. I would like to touch upon something that's actually not highlighted here, but it is part of the other tool underneath technology, which is security awareness training and testing. I believe that security-minded culture is probably one of the most important tools that you can have, because it means that you're driving a awareness within your environment, within your business and organization, to be aware of any kind of risks that exist. Just like Chad talked about with the 3 levels of risk and how people should be dealing with them. Those things need to be addressed, and I think that should be part of your basic mentality when it comes to security within your environment. Let's talk about the next slide, which is going to be our standard security. Standard security has everything on the page. It's a lot. But in reality, there are a lot more tools here that are not discussed. This is just what we believe are the standards that we should be providing to our clients. As you see, we have SIM, we have conditional multi-factor, we've got internet threat filtering or DNS filtering, and we've also got our SOC, our Security Operations Center, which I am the first member of. Let's move on to our next slide, which we'll talk about getting your security team.
Yep, and what I'd like to call out here is we're partners and we're trusted advisors for our client organizations. And whether we're managing a full IT stack or whether we're participating for engineering escalations and network operations and security operations, I know Seth's working across our security team or our support teams, making sure that they're maintaining security mindsets as well. And while Seth gets to navigate a lot of the hardest horror stories, we also have a team that's able to work out to the edge and be able to raise the flag and be part of that indicator process, the same way that you want to be able to have people within your organization be able to raise the flag and say, I think I clicked on something that's bad, or I think I got an email that looks suspicious. Yes, please do raise the flag on those. We want to make sure that we're encouraging people and we're thanking people for saying, this looks unusual, let's be part of the security response. As your partners, we're here to make sure that we're participating as your security team and that we're able to inform you of the relevant risk of the business and help you continually evolve security. What Seth called out for what we consider basic security and standard security today, that's for 2024 going into 2025. It's going to continue to evolve, and there are certainly elements in there that the industry best practices are continuing to evolve. You want to make sure that with your team, you're weighing and balancing the cost and the convenience and the security and the business risks. Be ready to respond to those attacks on your business. Don't just accept that they're out there and move on. Understand them, or at least to the extent as necessary to gain a business decision. And part of that, you can do that by understanding what other organizations have navigated. And I don't want any organization to experience the level of pain or stress that some of these business leaders have had to go through. Let's put best practices in place to try to keep the bad guys out, to build strong castles. I'm going to mix my metaphors and my analogies at this point. But there are things that we can do. These are accepted tools and practices that are out there in the industry that every organization can take advantage of.